Hello and welcome to Video Game Check. I'm Barry and today I'm going to be covering some of the basic to potentially intermediate strategies in the card game of Gwent. Before I get into this too much, bear in mind I've been playing for less than a month, so take whatever I'm saying as a beginner, just trying to impart what they've learned so far. Additionally, the game is in beta, so the whole flow of the game could change later, but I'm going to try and not give specific scenarios for specific cards, but more card types or examples of types of cards. I'm also only providing an overview. If you want to get more in depth in a topic, chances are somebody else that's smarter than me has written an article or done a video on it, and you can go and look all these things up. So while Gwent during the tutorial and during the games does a very good job of teaching you you know, how the game is played, it doesn't really teach you how to play the game. One of those ways, how to play the game, but not how the game is played. Right, so you know the mechanics quite quickly, well, a limited number of the mechanics quite quickly, but there's a lot of things that it doesn't explain well, and that doesn't give you any ideas into kind of how to formulate a strategy and how to actually win games. The AI is very stupid. You know, give it 2 or 3 goes at it and you should be able to win if you adapt to what you need. So here I'm going to give you some more real world advice on how to play against people. So whenever you start a game, the very first thing you're going to have to do is mulligan. And while the game does explain to you what a mulligan does, you send away 1 card, you get another card back, it never really explains the underlying mechanics of how it does it. Now, different games do mulligans differently. This is one at a time, but there's also a couple of underlying mechanisms that it uses that it doesn't elaborate on or doesn't explain to you. So the first part of the mulligan that it doesn't explain to you is the blacklist. Blacklist means that whenever you mulligan a card, you're never going to see another one of those cards during the same mulligan. So when you're starting here, you've got 3 cards to mulligan. The first card you get rid of, you're guaranteed not to draw that card back. Same with the second card, same with the third card, but it counts overall. So any cluster of mulliganing like that, if a card allows you to mulligan 3 cards or 5 cards or whatever, whenever you mulligan 1, you're never going to get that back unless there's nothing else for it to pull. So that's important to know and to think about. Excuse me. Additionally is the ordering of how you want to mulligan. Okay, so ordering, you want to mulligan the cards with the greatest risk of drawing more. So here's the current sort of hotness on the during this patch. The War Dancers, when you mulligan them, you can play it from your deck immediately. So mulligan these cards is good. But if I mulligan 1 now, I'm guaranteed not to draw my 3rd one, which is fine. I maybe don't want it. Deck lists, if you see them online, will often give you a mulligan order, and this is kind of what they're looking for. So for example, if I had the 2nd Blue Mountain Commando, I would want to mulligan that one first, because I don't want to draw any more Blue Mountain Commandos during my mulligans. Yeah, so certainly if I had 3 Blue Mountain Commandos, you know, I can mulligan 1, then I have a choice whether I want to get 2 of these down or be stuck with 2 Blue Mountain Commandos in hand. So you might end up with dead cards, and that's when you're looking for a mulligan, you've got to think about what cards you're going to be left with and what are going to be dead in your hand. So if you do have 3 of something in your hand, but you definitely don't want to, you maybe don't need them, right? So maybe I've got 3 of these, right? These cards aren't brilliant in the opening scenario, but if I was to mulligan one of them, I'm definitely not going to get one back because of the blacklist. But additionally, even if I don't mulligan one of them, I'm definitely not going to get one because all 3 are in my hand. So I might want to mulligan something else and mulligan this one last, because I'm guaranteed not to draw any more of these. So another thing to think about. Finally, remember you get 3 cards to mulligan round 1, and then on each subsequent round you're only going to get a single mulligan. So if I ever wanted to get rid of all of these, I would have to mulligan at least sort of 2 of them now, because or at least one of them now, because I'm never going to get the opportunity to, or through the game mechanics, I'm never going to get the opportunity to mulligan all three if I don't get rid of one now. So when thinking about mulliganing, these are all things to consider. The last thing about mulliganing that it doesn't explain to you is the sequencing of the cards. Right, so there's some math involved, probably hypergeometric distribution or something. But when you mulligan cards, the first card you mulligan, you're more likely to pull in rounds 2 or 3 than the second or the third card that you mulligan. Now, like I said, there's complex maths behind it. The basic amount being, when you put it back, you've got a 1 in whatever chance, and then that number increases when you mulligan a second card for reasons, just because of the positioning the cards could be. Don't worry about it, just know that this is a small consideration, that the first card you're going to mulligan, you're more likely to see it than the third card you're going to mulligan. So when you're mulliganing cards like Blue Mountain Commando, if you can mulligan that third, then you're guaranteed not to draw it. Well, not guaranteed, but you're less likely to draw it in rounds 2 and 3. So you've got more opportunity to play this for the full value, where it musters cards. So musters a mechanic where it pulls other units from your deck. So if the opportunity is there, if you've got 2 of these, for example, well, you've got two decisions at that point. One, do you mulligan it first so you definitely don't draw the third one, or do you mulligan it last because you don't want to draw it again? You're going to use it for its ability early on, and you never need to see that card again. So this round, for example, I might mulligan I want to mulligan both of these. Right, so they get put into play, and then I get the commando. So if I get rid of the commando, that means that all the other ones are in my deck for me to pull out later. Right, second part, coin flip. Losing the coin flip, and by losing we mean you have to go first, is generally considered to be quite bad. Right? Why is that? So losing the coin flip means you have to be proactive rather than reactive. So here I'm lucky, I've started with 8 points on the board. But let's assume in a normal deck you start with nothing on the board. If you play a 4, or if I was to play this 5 down, all my opponent needs to do is play a 6, and then I have to put in another card if I want to win. Right? So being reactive means they can see what I've played, and they just need to keep ahead of the cards that I've played in order to keep the pressure on, to keep me on being effectively a card down. So if I play with this 5 here, it's going to boost the other 2, but that'll give me 5, 9, 14, 15, 16. They would need a 16 point card, or 17 point card I should say, to keep things ahead. So we'll come on to tempo and stuff in a bit. But being proactive means you're going to have to play probably some of your bigger units first. Now, some cards mitigate that, like Surrey Dash, but effectively going first just means your opponent can react to what you're doing, and you have to anticipate what they're doing. They might not have the card you think, they might not be able to get around it. And what that can mean is that you end up overcommitting. So let's say I was to play anything here. My opponent could decide, okay, well, you're on whatever points I said I was, 16 points here. It's going to take me at least 2 cards. You can keep ahead, and it's going to pass there. So I've gone a card down to win the round, which is often fine. But in later rounds, or in longer rounds, that could be much more of a problem. And I said, if you're going first, you're more likely to end up with a card disadvantage going into future rounds. Now I'll come on to like why card advantage is good and stuff later, but if your opponents have got more cards, chances are they're able to play, cards being good, cards giving you the points, more cards equals more points equals the win. So there we go. So on occasion, it could be right to hero pass or dry pass here, right, and lose round 1. I've got 8 points down. If I was to pass here, my opponent would have to play at least a 9 to overcome, and then I would go into rounds 2 and 3 a card up. So I'd have 11 cards finishing this round, he'd have 10, he'd take the win. But then that puts you on the back foot as well for having like the final say. So if you win the second round, you're going first going into the third round. If you're already at a card disadvantage at that point, then it can be very difficult to maximise your potential. You'll be on the back foot again. You have to be proactive. Opponent will be able to react to what you're doing much more likely, and they should get the last say. So that's kind of it in terms of why losing the coin flip is bad. But let's talk now about game plans. So Gwent is a game of 3 rounds. Right, it's not just 1 round. If you win a round, that doesn't mean you've won the game. And there's different kind of objectives for each of the rounds in general, right? Regardless of kind of what deck you're playing or what your deck does. In round 1, you want to, ideally, if you're the first player, just not suffer card disadvantage going into later rounds. There's other considerations, but in general you want to be going into later rounds with card parity, like if you can have an equal number of cards with your opponent, or on a rare occasion if you can get ahead, that's even better. Round 2, if you've won, you want to use that round to your advantage. You want to play to your end game. If you've lost round 1, what you don't want to happen is get your finishers bled. So finishers is like your round 3, how are you going to win at the end, what cards you need to keep in your hand, and you definitely don't want to be playing those in round 2 because you want to save them for round 3. And then round 3, the order of the cards you have and the way you play them for your finishers, or how you're going to finish out the game. If you've got a handful of cards to your opponent's 2 or 3, then you're much more likely to win. If you're evens on cards or even behind, are your cards bigger than their cards? Can their cards counter your cards? So a few things to consider there. But it's a game of 3 rounds, and things to be thinking about is you don't want to give up too much in round 1 unless you want a long round 1. In round 2, you don't want to get bled of your cards or play to whatever your end game is. And round 3, it depends on what cards or what your deck does for your order of finishers. So a big part of actually playing the game is to do with sort of your opening plays. So your opening plays, often if you win the toss or lose the toss, sorry, all your cards might be reactive. So whenever you're building a deck, and also when you're playing the game, you want an opening move. Yeah, so an opening move for me is the mulligans, and hopefully hit one of those. If not, I can drop a fairly big unit with one of the officers. I do him, I mulligan a card away, and he gets boosted by whatever I drop. So that's probably like an 11-point play. Could be has the potential of being like an 18-point play if I was to draw Yavin. Obviously it's in my hand, so that can't happen. And if you mulligan him, you're not going to draw him again. So the mulligan rules apply for any mulligan. That's worth reiterating. But I need to be very careful because I've still got 2 of these in my deck, and I could draw another one. So my opening play would really be to drop this. My deck's built around, well, it's a net deck, so nothing special. But once there's 5 elves on the board, it pulls out another card. I forget what it is. So my first move would probably be this. So that would give me 9 plus the 8 that's already on the board, 17, plus another 6 for the card that it pulls out. So it's 23, and this is a really common play, right? It puts you 23 ahead with only 1 card played. The chances of your opponent overcoming that with 1 card of their own is very slim. So what they'll often do is pass. If you're playing in monsters maybe, you might want to drop a golem as your first action. So if your opponent then just like passes, gives you the round, you've then got some carryover going into the next round. Now it's not a particularly high tempo play. You may want to, you don't want to overcommit with your first move, but what you've got to do is make sure that it gives you the potential for kind of getting ahead later on. For example, if I was to, let's say it was a totally clean board, I drop my highest cost unit and my opponent just passes. Suddenly I've given up a really big unit for future rounds to take round 1, when maybe he was planning on passing anyway, and I could have got away with just playing, you know, like a 5-4 or a 5. Maybe using this to thin out the deck, maybe things to think about. You want to be thinking about your opening play. And if you do lose the toss, on occasion it can be right just to totally dry pass or naked pass. If your deck requires a lot of setup, if your deck requires like a lot of cards that don't, you want a long round 3, then it could be right to pass on round 1, hope your opponent passes round 2, so you get for them to get the card advantage back, and then go for a long round 3. And there's a lot of things to think about, but really when you're both making your deck and when you're considering your mulligan, you want to be thinking about, okay, if I lose the toss, what am I going to play? What card am I going to play? Then overall part of your game plan has to think about placement. If you've got cards that buff cards that are next to each other, or cards that move cards, these kind of things, you want to be considering what role you're going to play in. So in the current patch, in the current meta, a lot of cards are agile. So that's the ones with the these sort of recycle symbols on them there. Agile cards you can place anywhere. But for example, this card pulls out another 2 the same. So suddenly you've got 3 cards in a row together. Are those 3 cards worth putting beside the existing cards, or should they start a new row? The game as it stands has a lot of these agile units at the moment. There's far fewer fixed location, so it's more choice is provided. This is both good and bad. Becomes much harder to anticipate where an opponent's going to play their cards to, and it becomes well, for you, you've got much more choices to make. There's more opportunities to make mistakes. In fact, in the whole game, the more opportunities you provide for your opponent to make a mistake, the better. So, whilst a lot of people don't like these agile cards very much, they are probably decent for the game. Now, as I said, you've got to think ahead. There's a couple of cards that do a lot of damage to a single row. There's a couple of cards that do damage to multiple rows. Whenever an opponent plays something that affects a row, could be weather, could be a single card, do you want to split up your units? Do you want to put them all in a line? These kind of things. Generally splitting things up is better. But if you have a lot of cards that are on a fixed row, what you don't want, or what you probably don't want, is like a whole bunch of cards that can only be played on the melee row if you don't have stuff like weather clears or armor buffs, things like that. So again, it's both a deck building consideration and a play situation, I forget what I was saying. And then the last thing to think about when you're putting these cards down is the sort of order of play and engines. So if you've got cards that get stronger over time, the more cards that come into play when it's on the board, or if you've got cards that are trigger off other cards either being in play or coming into play, putting those down in the right order is also very important. So again, this will come down to reading the card. What does the card do? So whenever you mulligan this unit, boost all elf allies by 1. Now that only applies to units in play. Some might affect it when they're in the deck, some might affect it when they're in your hand, or some combination thereof. So it's very important to know the order of cards that you're going to be putting down and what it does, whether it builds up over time or whether you get the full value of it in one go. So this takes us on to going into a little bit more in depth of tempo. So tempo generally means sort of staying ahead of your opponent, right? So when you play a card, is that enough to force a response from your opponent, or does it allow the opponent to pass, right? So again, this is where first versus second kind of comes into it. So things to think about, First of all, it's a game of 3 rounds. Discussed that. You don't need to win every round. So rounds themselves could be used to provide tempo where you need it. Both players are able to give up a whole round, so they don't need to play all their strong cards in every round if they can get better value by playing weaker cards versus your opponent's stronger cards. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. What you want to be thinking about every time you play a card, certainly as the first player in particular, is does this put me far enough ahead that the opponent can't also go far enough ahead that it's going to take 2 cards from me. So there's two things to think about. It's primarily reach and your tempo overall. So reach means whenever you play a card, if you're reactive, can you overcome what the other player has done in one more card? Right, so sometimes it might be worth playing, if you think your opponent's going to pass when they're ahead, if you can play a card down that doesn't take you ahead, you need to make sure that another card after that is going to take you ahead. Otherwise they can pass and you end up going like two cards down. What you really want, of course, though, is for being behind on the board to be going ahead of the board every time you play. So in this opening move, for example, if this was my opening move and I played 8, or let's say my opponent had played an 8 cost card, I would want to get down at least 9 to prevent my opponent from passing and winning. And you need to be thinking about what's going on the board. Are they getting buffs every turn? These kind of things. But you want to be putting down enough that puts you ahead of the player, and that's how it goes. It's like a swing. You go ahead, your opponent goes ahead, you go ahead, your opponent goes ahead. And if your opponent ever gets too far ahead, that's when you want to consider whether it's worth getting out of the round. And if you can't take the swing back to your side of the board, then are you willing to give up a card for it? So if you played a card that puts you within sort of 4, so you can get it with an additional card, but that will put you to 7 to their 8. Is that something you want to be doing? So thinking of the swing of the game and the flow of the game there, can you get ahead? So let's say I was just to play this, and you're going to see, yeah, that's fine. Right, we're just going to pull out, I forget what her name is, what is her name? Aileron, right? So that puts me on 23 points for a single card play. Opponent here played quite well. They were able to play a card from your hand, then return a bronze or silver ally. So unfortunately, whilst the points would have got them up to 23 with Roach, he had to put it back. Right, so the computer AI is not the best example. But overall, that was a really good play. It would have taken him up to 23 points, which is enough to tie. So we'd both be on 1 card spent and on even points. Then that puts the swing back on me. So when it's evens, when the balance is evens, I'm now going to have to play big in order to keep the tempo on my side after the computer plays. Now I could pass here. I know the computer can beat me in a single card, but that'll put them on 9 cards for round 2. I'll put them on 11 cards for round 2 to my 12. With 12 cards, with being a card ahead and a spy in hand, which will come on to spies as well, then I have a very strong chance of winning the sort of next 2 rounds. Like a single card advantage is quite good. If you can get to a 2 card advantage, you should be in a very good position. Now there are decks that don't mind going a few cards down, because they're able to draw more cards than you can, but in general you want to be staying ahead. So I need to start thinking about what else I can do in order to win. And there's a whole, I'm not going to give total specific examples for this deck in particular, but what I want to talk about is the types of cards that you've got and what they do. So let's go with spells. So spells have a value. Some spells are better played early round, some spells are better played late round. So early round spells could be killing off a unit that's going to get bigger over time, so an engine unit. those can be good to play. They maybe don't provide a huge. You need to be considered those for value, right? So they're not on their own going to provide a specific amount of tempo. It depends what the spell does. So if it's like a spell that does damage to a row, well, it'd be probably not good to play it now because we'll get more value out of it later on. If it's a spell that took out a unit and a oneer, then maybe it's worth playing, but then we're sacrificing the potential to play that same spell against what may be a better unit later on. So always when thinking about spells, you're looking for the value that it provides at the time you play it, and as you get to know your deck, do you play it early, late, what units are the targets, what units aren't. Another type of unit you can play are those that have countdowns. So units with countdowns tend to be low tempo. They don't tend to be the sort of high value units, and they also tend to be counterable. So you can lock them, you can destroy them, you can move them to somewhere where they're not useful. So whenever you play a unit with a countdown, certainly you don't want to be doing that when you are behind. So when you here I could play a unit with a countdown because chances are either my opponent continues to put cards into the round, at which point whatever the countdown effect is going to happen, which is hopefully better for me, or my opponent passes and then I'm just one card down. Weather's also quite low tempo. You're only going to probably get sort of 2 value max out of it unless it's like gold weather, or even silver weather. And also counterable. Like most decks run some kind of anti-weather tech. Here I've got 3 in hand, but you have to assume the mages as things stand have like clear skies. Additionally, there's lots of other things that can move units out of weather, and there are a lot of clears. There's a lot of clear options. So weather tends to be quite low tempo. You want to be playing that when you're going into a longer round, and also when you know where the opponent's going to be putting their units. So again, that's where positioning comes into play. Agile units that can go anywhere have a lot more value in playing around weather. Units that have to go on, say, the siege row or the melee row, you can kind of play into those once you kind of seen 1 or 2 of the units that your opponent's playing, because you can always assume that they're going to have more of the same. At least while the card pool is quite small. As the card pool grows, maybe singleton units might become a little bit more valuable. Then you want to be considering your own units that have value over time. So these sort of engines, if you've got something like, again, I don't want to give examples, but let's say you put a card down that for every other card you play gains +1, or something that gives a boost to every new unit that comes into play. You want to be getting that down first. Now these also tend to be quite low tempo on their own, but what will happen is that if the longer the round goes, then the more value you're going to get out of them. So getting them down early, you just have to make sure that your opponent's tempo doesn't swing so far ahead that you're going to have to play 2 or 3 cards in order to catch up. At that point, if you've exhausted half of your engine and then they've got so far ahead with just like their big tempo plays, you need to be thinking about, okay, well, sure, I want to play this 4 card, this 4 card, and this 4 card, then every card I play is going to get like +3. But by the time you've done that, your opponent could be 20 or 30 points ahead, and they can pass, and you have to go significantly down and lose your engine for future rounds. Muster units, so as you saw there, I played a single Blue Mountain Commando and it pulled out the other Blue Mountain Commandos. So while it's only a 9, it's not too bad. It also has secondary effects of thinning your deck, and it is generally quite high tempo. You saw there playing that, let me combo with these to pull out her. So playing a single bronze from my hand, let me get up to 23 points on turn 1. Now that is a very high tempo play. And the other sort of stronger silver muster units and bigger sort of bronze muster units all do similar-ish things. So here, this is an early play for my deck, but these muster units, because they're so high tempo, are also potential finishers. If you played the Wolf Witchers round 3, you're getting 19 points on the board from a single card, and that's pretty good. But what also happens is you've also got the potential to overcommit, right? So if it was this 17, 19 points, whatever you get from them, if I put that down as my first card, my opponent could pass, because it's going to take them 2 cards to overcome it, and then I've missed out on that potential value in subsequent rounds. But this have additional advantage of thinning your deck. So I've now pulled these 2 out, which means I can't draw them again, unless they're put back. And so I should be getting more high impact cards later on. The last kind of cards to think about are spies. Now by spies, I'm talking about the cards, disloyal cards that let you draw other cards. Every faction has access to like a big one of these, varies from sort of 10 to 12, 10, 11, 12 points. As things stand, again, that could change in the future. But that's going into negative tempo. And so a lot of new players will think that spies are terrible. You're like, giving you negative tempo, you've handed this over to your opponent. Why on earth would you do that? And ultimately, there's a lot of reasons to play spies. And it goes back to sort of tempo overall, where, as I said, rounds themselves can actually count as tempo. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of when you might want to play a spy, and I'll come on to some other additional benefits of spies for card advantage a little later on. So let's say I was significantly... So I've started. So as things stand, chances are I'm going to go last in the final round. If you want to have the last word, if you've got some sort of big finisher card that really relies on the opponent having no answer to it, or being unable to answer it, maybe for a turn, maybe it's got a countdown on it, or maybe it is you want as many of the opponent's cards down so you can choose your best targets. Then a spy is able to reverse the play, or reverse the last say in the game by putting it down. Now, if my opponent was on, say, 39 points here, chances are I'm not going to win that. I could put my spy down and then get a card back. So it wouldn't have actually cost me a card. So rather than just straight up passing, I could get that one back. Now, it's not an ideal use of spies in this kind of situation. There's a lot of better ways of playing them, but it's something that you could do. So that'd be maybe a round two play. If I wanted to switch the tempo from my opponent getting the last say to me getting the last say, I could put that spy down in round 2. You can also play them on rounds you intend to lose. As I say, you don't need to win every round. So let's have a think about when you play a spy. In fact, right, round 1, if you've got like a setup heavy deck, maybe it doesn't do much round 1, but you need to get all your cards thin, you need to get all your setup units down. Maybe you're going to resurrect them later, maybe they pull multiple other sort of reses out of the graveyard, that kind of thing. You set them down, your opponent starts to get ahead, they've passed, and then you can play the card to get a card back. So that's one option. You can also use it for card trading. Like if you've got a bad hand and you're not going to possibly able to mulligan all the cards that you want away, you could put the spy down as long as you're within sort of reach, right? So as long as you can kind of get to the point where the tempo is going to swing back to you, and they'll have to play an additional card, at which point you give up. You've gone kind of 1 to 2 cards up at that point if you're first or second player, because you've replaced the card that you've played the spy with, and they've continued to play into it, even though you're intending on giving up anyway. Round 2, a lot of players will just drop their spy, giving your opponent 12. They have to play a card. Anyway, so if you've won round 1, then going into round 2, a lot of people will drop their spy, which pretty much signals that you're not going to play anymore in that round, just to get the card back. Your opponent still has to play, because if they pass, then you can almost certainly overcome the spy and whatever card they've played, or just the spy on its own. So you're kind of dragging again the sort of 2 card advantage out of them, but it's not really maximizing it. Every spy also has an ability that does something. Yavon's only really looking at cards, but they can maybe move a unit, they can maybe turn a unit, they can do a few different things. So you're not really taking that full advantage. And if you play a spy first turn, your opponent pretty much knows that you're not committing, so they could play a unit with carryover. Come on to what carryover is later if you don't know. Or they could play a low tempo card, knowing that you can't overcome 17, say, in a single card. So by playing that as your first move, you're really signaling to your opponent that you're not going to stay in that round, and giving them a lot of information early on. So if you are going to play the spy, or let's say you got the same kind of setup deck again, and you want to play into round 2, so you've won round 1, it was a short round 1, maybe you've got a lot of setup in round 2, make sure that spy is the last card you play. Don't open with it. Sure, it might draw you into something good, but you don't want to give your opponent that information, and you don't want them to have a short round 2 again. You want to be bleeding cards from the opponent, so when you bleed a card, it's like you're playing worse cards to get better cards out of your opponent, or potentially get their finishers out of their hand, so you can go into round 3. You can also play your spy on rounds where you've got a way of dealing with it. Maybe you've got a Scorch in hand or something, and he's going to be the strongest unit on the board. Maybe, but then you're giving up your card advantage for it. So unless, like, you're playing a 12, there's another 12 on the other side, you can Scorch them both in one go. That's probably worth it. If you just putting a card over to draw a card, which you then have to Scorch, then it's probably not worth it. So you need to be thinking about these. Going into round 3, spies tend to not, you tend to not want to give your opponent much tempo in round 3. Usually there's less cards going around. Often there's less ways of dealing with sort of big cards. So unless you really need the last word at that point, you won't see a lot of spies played. Mulligan that away if you can. In general, there are reasons to have them. But you're not going to see too many spies round 3, or these type of spies. There are other disloyal units that do other things, but I'm specifically talking about the 10 to 12 cost ones. Spies also do provide some other benefits. They do have sort of Scorch protection, as I was saying there. You put that on your opponent's side. Let's say none of your units get up to the same value. They can't Scorch anything because they're just going to take points off their own side of the board. And they do often have a secondary ability which you can kind of use to set up things that you're doing. Maybe it moves a unit, maybe it weakens a unit, things along those lines. So you want to be doing that. Okay, so that's roughly spies. There's better videos out there than mine, but don't write off spies entirely. They do have a function. That's why they're in a lot of highly competitive decks. You just need to know when to play them. So I touched on it with spies, but I want to talk about it as an overall concept, and that is card advantage, right? So playing more cards or having more cards is quite clearly better. The cards in your deck are there for a reason. If you can get more of them on the board than your opponent, theoretically you should be winning. And if you're not winning, then you got a rubbish deck. Go back to the drawing board. Additionally, like, if you end up with more cards, you're going to be able to be more reactive to your opponent. You can put down whatever to begin with, and then, like, if you're 2 cards up, they're going to go with something, but because you have the last say, you're going to be able to have a full state. You'll be able to survey the full state of the board before making your final action, or your final 2-3 actions on occasion. So what you need to think about, of course, is that by default you're only going to draw 3 new cards. You're going to get 2 new cards in round 2, 1 new card in round 3, unless you've got something else in there that lets you draw, such as spies. And generally there's no other resources to consider. Any cards can be played at any time, pretty much. You don't have to build up your mana, you don't have to build up you don't have to sacrifice anything to be able to play these cards. So if you can get ahead in cards, then there's no disadvantage to having more cards in general. So a couple of things to think about for this sort of kind of card advantage. If you're ahead on cards and you've won round 1, for example, then you can bleed more cards out of your opponent in round 2. So what's bleeding? Bleeding should be playing, like I said, your low tempo units to get higher tempo units out of your opponent to give you a stronger round 3 or final rounds. You can even do it in round 1 to give you like a stronger round 2 or whatever, but it tends to happen most often in round 2. You're playing sort of, you've won round 1, you're playing sort of your lower units still within reach, but they're having to play sort of their better units, and you're just keeping your 3, 4, 5 cards, whatever you got for round 3. Additionally, with the sort of bleeding effect, you can let low tempo units turn into sort of high tempo effects if you can stretch a round out. And again, spies come in handy for stretching a round out. You know, if you get so far ahead that your opponent's like, well, I'm just going to pass here, you can potentially, you know, get some of their better cards out by putting a spy on their side of the board, letting them catch up. As long as you know that your cards at the end are going to be the ones that take round 3. Having more cards lets you have the last action. As I said, the last action is very important in any round, but in particular in round 3. Being able to see the full state of the board before doing anything just means that you can maximise the potential of whatever cards you have left. So in terms of generating card advantage, there's a few things you can do. So the first one's like deck thinning. If you can pull more cards out of your deck so you're left with just the ones that you need for any given situation, then you're going to potentially get more out of it. So on its own, it's not generating advantage, but they're usually high tempo plays, and if you can get ahead of your opponent so they have to give up a card to go to match or beat you, then that tends to be worth it. So mustering units are useful there. Similarly, tutors. So tutor comes from demonic tutor, which let you, one of the first cards in Magic the Gathering, go and fetch another card from your deck. So these tutors can be quite strong. Something like, don't have any in my hands, but if you played a card that let you fish a second card out of your hand, again, that's a high tempo play. And if you can get a high tempo play down on the board so your opponent has to give up cards in order to match or beat you, then that is useful. So again, round 2, you don't want to be playing all your high tempo units, of course, but if you can get that down, if you can get high tempo units down as winning, your opponent has no choice but to keep feeding cards into the machine in order to beat you. In terms of tutors, there are random versus targeted ones that let you go play the top bronze unit from your deck or something, versus fetch a, look at, you know, the top 3 silvers or something and play one of those. Very different, and you got to be careful when playing those that random cards don't come out that you don't want to come out. Certainly you don't want to be committing a lot in round 2 if you're going for the bleed strategy, when you need some of the cards that might end up getting played. And so, yeah, if you can thin your deck out as well, the cards that are left are generally better cards or stronger cards, and that's going to give you a stronger round 3. So while it's not technically card advantage, it is getting better cards down. Right, and then finally spies. As I said, that can reverse the order of play. If you put a spy down on your turn, you're getting a card back, so it's not costing you a card. So if you're evens, you play your spy, your opponent's like, well, I have to keep playing because I can't pass here, then you can end up 1 or 2 cards ahead, also giving you the last say for the second or third round. All very good. And then you're looking for cards that return to hand as well. Maybe there's a few cards with a countdown, or if you lose a round, that they come back to hand. That can be very powerful. You know, you've put them down, your opponent has to keep playing cards in order to beat it, but then you get your cards back. So if that was the case, you know, maybe they've had to overcommit by a card, you know, it's 10 versus 9, you get a card back, suddenly it's 11 versus 9 going into the last round, you've got that 2 card advantage, and if the card that you got back doesn't do a lot, you can always mulligan it away and hope for a better card. You're also looking for units that can generate carryover. So carryover is effectively cards that generate tempo from previous turns. So cards with death wishes that spawn units, if they die round 1, then they're back for or because of round 1, round 1 ending, then you get those units at the start of round 2, and that can be really strong. If you carry over like 6 points into round 2, so let's say I passed here, I've got nothing. Let's say I've made this unit resilient somehow, and my opponent passed and I passed. I'm going with 6 points of carryover into round 2. That can be particularly strong because suddenly, if you were to pass, your opponent still has to play a card to beat you. And if you've got enough of it, maybe they have to play 2 cards to beat you. So if you've committed heavily in round 1 because you've got this sort of resilience or death wish that spawns units archetype deck, then the carryover you take into the second round can generate a 1 or 2 card advantage for you because you don't have to put any cards in after winning, and your opponent might have to put in 1 or 2 cards after winning. So that can be quite good. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it. Now, none of this was particularly specific, I don't think, but they are sort of basic concepts to think about. I think the most important ones you want to be thinking about are tempo. So as I said, being able to, the thing that helped my game the most was when I realised that if I was playing a card, I had to end up ahead of my opponent. Right, I was sometimes playing a card that would just put me 3-4 points behind, and then my opponent would pass, and I would go into the next round a card down, or potentially 2 cards down if I was the first player. It's more obvious as first player. If I was to put down like a 4, my opponent puts down a 10, I put down another 4, they pass. I have to play another card, which brings me 2 cards down, which means that a dry pass in the second round isn't going to give me those cards back. So learning that was one of the more important things so far. Learning how to use spies properly. I mean, it's still tricky. I don't know exactly when's the best time to play them at all times. But understanding that they weren't absolute trash is, for all the reasons that I mentioned and probably some more, was very important for me as well. And finally, learning about some of the concepts like bleeding cards, you know, dry passing to get the card advantage back, those kind of things. Learning, you know, just to think about my game beginning to end and thinking about it as a 3-round game and not just, okay, I need to win this round, okay, I need to win the next round. Although sometimes, you know, winning round 1 and pushing round 2 is a thing, but how you do that. And also the hidden concepts of how the mulligan works, and that really lets you think about how you want your hand to play out and your deck to play out. So there's a lot there. A lot of it I perhaps didn't explain particularly well, but if any of the concepts are interesting for you, by all means, you know, search for an article or a video from another player. I might cover some of the other ones later once I get a little bit better at the game. I'll also try and give you a second sort of introductory beginner strategy video where we talk a little bit about deck building and like archetypes, how to evaluate a card, synergies, consistencies, things along those lines. But until next time, this is VG Check signing out.